think 75.
I'm going a good 50%.
This is actually a better turnout than
Some people don't feel self-conscious about doing myself.
well, it takes a veteran. Oh God, right?
Or something, during annual, it used to drag me nuts. Because you'd vote the budget, you'd vote the school budget, and half the place would be gone.
Good evening, everyone. Am I on? Yep. I'll declare the meeting open for tonight's session of the special town meeting on November 8th. I believe the time is 7:08. We started a little late because there were a lot of folks waiting in line out in the hall. I'll introduce myself. I'm the Stowe moderator, and I'm a voter. My name's David Walrath. I live at 30 Samuel Prescott Drive. I was just elected this spring, so if you if you see any hesitation, it's because I'm still learning the job. Luckily, we have experienced deputy and assistant moderators to help me. Before we start, I'd like to review a couple of logistics items. The emergency exits are out the door you came in and out the entrance you came in, or through the door to your right, down at the bottom of the hall, not over here. Restrooms are again out in the hall and down the hall to your left, basically kind of behind this wall. We ask everyone to now silence or turn off your cell phones or pagers. I'm going to turn my phone off here. There's no beverages or food here in the auditorium. We ask that you go out into the hall or in the cafeteria. There's no smoking on school property. We ask, I don't think we have a large press contingent, but, am I on there? There we go. We ask that there be no photography of the audience during any counted votes. And I don't think we're projecting the meeting in the cafeteria, so I don't need to talk about that. So, as has been a sort of a recent history, I'd like to start with an invocation that my predecessor, Ed Newman, got from the town of Concord. So I'll ask everyone if you can stand up. So before we start the business of this special town meeting, as has been our custom, let's commence by rising and remaining silent for a moment. Let each of us reflect on how, through this town meeting, we and our neighbors provide for our common good. As we deliberate and vote tonight, let us be reminded that the passions of the moment are not always the best guide for our conduct in the future, and that if sacrifice by a few is required, the sacrifice should only be where the common goal is worthy of the sacrifice. Let us approach each issue, no matter how divisive, with an open heart and with an open mind. And above all, let each of us maintain a saving sense of humor so that the debates at this town meeting will not be a source of division among us when our business here is finished. And for those who choose, I'd invite everyone to say a Pledge of Allegiance with me. I pledge of allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. And please be seated. So I think the first slide that we have is just a notice that there'll be a Veterans Breakfast on Thursday, November 11th at St. Isidore's, and we invite everyone to attend. Veterans, I believe, are free, and $4 is a pretty cheap breakfast for everyone else. Next slide. So the cast of characters, I've introduced myself. I'm the moderator. Due to circumstances this past year, we don't have our regular annual deputy moderator. So I'd like to appoint Gary Horowitz as the temporary deputy moderator for this meeting. Now that allows a couple of things. One is if I need to go out and powder my nose, it lets me, but also on Article 2, I'd like to step aside. I don't have a legal conflict of interest, but I thought it'd be best to maintain not an appearance of one. Some folks might feel that there is one. This is requires a majority vote of this town meeting to have a temporary moderator. So all in favor, please raise up your voter cards. Okay, any opposed? I don't see any opposed. I'll call that unanimous. Even if I missed one or two, I'd point out that the moderator is permitted to call something as unanimous or other votes unless challenged by 7 voters. If I did miss you, it's not to, I'm not trying to dismiss your vote. It just by being able to call it as the highest vote that we can, it just makes it clear if someone has to go through the minutes of the meeting and check on what happened and make sure that the votes were all correct. Now, I've also appointed Liz Painter as assistant moderator. That, if we, in the unlikely event that we require overflow, allows us to be in another room. That doesn't require a vote, but I'd like to call for a majority vote anyways, just as good practice. So everyone in favor? Any opposed? So I'll call that unanimous. So we also have up behind me the town clerk, who is actually busy swearing in the deputy and temporary moderators, or assistant moderators at this point. And Kay Desmond, who's the assistant town clerk, is taking notes at the moment. The town clerk's office does an enormous amount of work, and I really have to thank them. Otherwise, I'd be completely lost up here. Next slide. So some of the folks who will be speaking tonight, we have the Board of Selectmen, who are sitting directly in front of me. We have Laura Spears, the chairman. We have Steve Dungan, Charlie Kern, Tom Ryan, who's our newest selectman, Jim Salvi. Also at the front table is Susan McLaughlin. I think, she's sitting over here. She's the administrative assistant. We also have Bill Wrigley, the town administrator, and John Witten, the town council, sitting at that table. Next slide. The Finance Committee, we have more members than we have had in a while. Gary Burnk will be hearing from the Finance Committee on each of the articles tonight. Some of their recommendations have changed slightly from what's printed in the warrant. Gary Burnklow is the chair. He's sitting on this end. We also have Ann DeLudy, Patty Herron, Christopher Sarno, Richard Connolly, Peter McManus, Richard Rollins, Bruce Walbridge, and Eric Sears. And Beth Toby is sitting in the front aisle. She's their secretary of the Finance Committee. Next slide. We also have the Capital Planning Committee. They'll be weighing in on just Article 3, and I won't go through all the names for that, but they give a recommendation on all capital articles. Next slide. The Community Preservation Committee is 9 members appointed by 9 different boards, and they'll also be weighing in on Article 3. I won't go through all the names there. Next slide. The Planning Board, Steve Quinn will be addressing Article 2 from the Planning Board. Next slide. The Conservation Commission, Kathy Sfera will be making a statement from the Conservation Commission also on Article 2. Next slide. We have some non-voters here. As is our tradition, we vote to permit them to speak at town meeting. We have Bill Wrigley, the town administrator, John Whitten, our town council. Although I don't believe they're planning to speak on anything, we have Mike McLaughlin, the fire chief, and I think Pat Perry might be here. But anyways, I would like to take a vote of town meeting to permit them to address town meeting. So that takes a majority vote. All in favor? Any opposed? And I will call that unanimous. Next slide. So the moderator expects a number of things. Most of you are longtime town meeting veterans, but I'll go through a few of them. The logistics were mentioned above: no smoking, no eating, all that. And there's a much greater detail in the town meeting handbook, which Ed had previously put together, and many of you are familiar with. Those that aren't, there's a town meeting handbook out in the cafeteria that folks can get that goes into a lot of details. But the most important is we expect respectful debate, and that includes all comments and questions should be directed to the moderator, not to other people in the room. And if it's a question, the moderator will request an answer from someone else in the room, and that tends to keep things from getting personal. When you come up to speak, we ask that you show your voter ID card, and as I did at the beginning, you give your name and street address. And as I said, identify yourself before speaking. Voter comments should be related to the motion being discussed. That's what's in the warrant. Some of these articles, I understand there's a lot of related things that people might want to bring up, and we try to keep the debate focused on the article and the motion that's in front of you, and not on a lot of peripheral things. Voters should avoid being repetitive. If someone said what you plan to say, that's probably helpful to those of us that want to keep it to a one-night town meeting if you sit down. And as is our tradition in Stowe, every 30 minutes, the moderator will pause debate and ask for someone to call the question. That's a motion to terminate debate. Now, anyone can call the question before that, but the moderator may choose not to recognize calling the question if the moderator doesn't feel that both sides have had a chance to air their positions. At about 10:30, we'll take a check on our progress to see if it's likely that we'll finish. We ask for balanced debate. If I see one side, I'm not going to try to do for and against microphones tonight, but if I see one either for or against being the predominant position being stated, I may ask for the other side, if other folks have something to say, to come up to the front of the line. And then finally, if you wish to make a motion to amend, there's blue motion to amend forms up here at the front by John Whitten. At the bottom, near the entrance, I don't know what you'd call those, at the end of those two things as you came in, and also out in the cafeteria. And those need to be submitted to town council before the moderator is willing to consider them, to be checked if they're both legal and within the four corners of the article. And finally, it's not really an expectation, but being a new moderator, I'd appreciate if you have any thoughts on improving town meeting or improving my moderating, that you fill out one of the feedback forms and return it. They're out in the hall just outside the meeting room. Next slide. Stowe TV is no longer broadcasting this on just one channel. We now have two, Comcast and Verizon. And featured this week is, of course, town meeting, but also Veterans Day program and MCAS information that, to be honest, I'm not quite sure what that is. But you can check the schedule now online if you go to stowtv.org, which actually puts you right into the regular Stowe Municipal website, but at the Stowe TV page, which I thought was pretty neat. And of course, the Stowe Independent also shows their programs. So, next slide. I'd like to thank some of the town meeting volunteers. Jerry Horn sets up the sound system. Lou Halprin does the audio video setup. The volunteers at Stowe TV, which include their staff, Ann Van Tyne, Mike Kopinski, I think I got your name spelled right, runs the computer system, and of course the tellers and the checkers and all of the other volunteers and paid staff that we have. Next slide. So I think we're done with our opening comments. So I believe we are ready for a motion from Mr. Ryan.
Mr. Moderator, I move that the reading of the warrant and the return of the constable thereon be waived, but be made part of the record of the meeting, and that the moderator be permitted to refer to each article by subject matter instead of reading each article in its entirety.
Second.
Now this basically allows it so that the moderator doesn't have to read back to you the entire article on each article after after it's already been moved. This requires a majority vote, so if we could have a show of cards of all those in favor. Thank you, and all those opposed. I will call that unanimous. I believe we have another motion from Mr. Ryan.
Mr. Moderator, I move that no new article or section thereof be considered after 10:30 p.m. and that as soon as practical, after 10:30, the meeting be adjourned to 7 p.m. November 9th, 2010 in this place.
Second.
So we have a motion and a second. This motion is debatable, I believe. I should have checked that. But seeing no debate, we'll go to a vote. All in favor? All opposed? I'll call that unanimous. Hopefully we will not go that long. So I believe we are now ready for the first motion for an article on the warrant, and I believe Laura Spear will read that.
Mr. Moderator, I move that the sum of $1 million is appropriated to pay costs of providing financial and technical assistance to customers of the Assabet Water Company within the town of Stowe, as recently authorized by Chapter 359, Section 128 of the Acts of 2010, which was enacted by the General Court to permit the Massachusetts Water Pollution Abatement Trust, the Trust, in concert with the town, to assist these customers in obtaining potable water, and authorizes, among other things, said customers to apply for low-interest loans to aid in the permitting, construction, and operation of drinking water wells, and/or the reimbursement of expenditures made in the permitting, construction, and operation of drinking water wells, and including, but not limited to, funds for the cost of wells and treatment and storage facilities and distribution pipes associated therewith. And to meet this appropriation, the treasurer, with the approval of the Selectmen, is authorized to borrow said amount through the trust in accordance with Chapter 111, Section 127B, 1/2, and Chapter 29C of the general laws, or pursuant to any other enabling authority, and to issue bonds or notes of the town therefore. Betterments shall be assessed upon the properties of homeowners that obtain loans for this purpose in accordance with the provisions of Chapter 111, Section 127B, 1/2 of the general laws as aforesaid. The town is hereby authorized to enter into one or more loan agreements with the trust and one or more project regulatory agreements with the Department of Environmental Protection as may be necessary to obtain funds from the trust to be used to make the low-interest loans described above. The town, acting through the Board of Selectmen, is also authorized to execute and deliver all other contracts, agreements, or certificates as may be necessary to carry out the purposes of this vote. And I would like to add that the Board of Selectmen voted tonight to support this article with a 2% interest rate for loans provided to the residents who take advantage of the potential program.
Thank you. And before the presentation, could we have a recommendation or a report from the Finance Committee?
Certainly, Mr. Moderator. The Finance Committee recommends approval of this warrant article. While it's true that the town will maintain some risk for the loans approved, we believe that risk is low and will be mitigated by the loan interest earned.
And we have a presentation, I believe,
We do.
to explain what this means.
We do. Can you hear me? Can you hear me now? Can you hear me now? Okay, so as most of you know, the residents of Harvard Acres are in a predicament. Their water company, Assabet Water, is filing for bankruptcy. The only question we know is when. And we were told today that it looks like they're going to be filing next week. So everyone is doing everything we can to help the residents be able to have safe, healthy, potable drinking water. This is one of those programs that was actually driven largely by our legislators. I want to acknowledge Representative Hogan and Senator Eldridge in making sure that we got legislature that the governor signed on October 15th to issue loans for digging wells. Nobody wants to take over the water company. Everyone tried. We tried to find all kinds of companies to take over. So this is the solution, and I want to thank our town administrator, Bill Wrigley, the Board of Health, and all the people who have been working in the health department to make this transition as painless as possible. So what this article does is asks you to adopt the legislature that was approved and signed by the governor a couple of weeks ago. It's a program that's modeled on an existing program for septic systems. It's been around for a while, run by the state, called the Community Septic Management Program, or Title V. It's designed to provide emergency, low-cost loans to those who need it. The Commonwealth would make a loan at 0% interest to the town. The town would then administer those loans to the residents at a low interest rate to cover the administrative costs. And I'm going to go into some of the terms and conditions. And I'm hopeful you can all see that. We're asking that we have the ability to borrow $1 million. This is based on a survey of the Harvard Acres residents, seeing what the response rate was by the residents in terms of those who want to apply for a loan. Roughly, it's about 60%, and we're estimating, based on what we've seen so far of actual costs of digging a well, that it would cost about $10,000 on average. So, 100 residents, roughly 10,000, that's how we get to $1 million. The loan rate, as I mentioned before, from the Commonwealth to the town is 0%. Nothing. We have the ability to charge a low interest to the residents to cover the administrative costs. So that interest rate isn't for us to make money. It isn't for us to discourage people. The interest rate is to cover what it would cost for us to do this program. The term of the loan from the state to the town would be 20 years. The term that the town would have for the residents would be a payback of 10 years. That's to help mitigate some of the risk. The payment terms for the town to pay back the state would be annual. For the residents, it'd be quarterly, part of your tax bill. You would have this attached, so it'd be quarterly invoiced. You would pay it just like you do your taxes. Because it's a betterment program, the loan becomes attached as a lien to the property. If the home is sold, the loan must be paid off right at the sale. If you look at what's really covered by this, I read it as part of the motion. You can see it up on the slide. The legislature says drilling of a water well and related treatment and storage facilities and distribution pipe. And we actually are taking that concept and making sure that drilling of a water well includes all of the practical expenses. If you have a tree in the way and that's where your well's got to go, that's part of drilling a well. If you have to take down a couple other trees because you don't like them, too bad. Now, there are some special criteria that are established as part of the legislation. This is a very short time period. It was done specifically for our town, for that community. It expires July 2011. From our perspective, we heard a lot of people saying it's kind of tough times. I found the cash to drill a well. Can I take advantage of this program? And so we are making this program applicable to anyone who's drilled a well after May 1st, 2011. You must be an Assabet, 2010, I'm sorry. You must be an Assabet water customer. All right, so I told you how we got to the $1 million estimate. Some other considerations: after 10 years, the funds that are left over from the 2% interest that we may not need for the administrative costs will be returned to those who took out the loans. We will have established some reserve funds for any potential defaults. Homeowners who miss a payment or are late, you're going to be charged the same interest rate that you would be charged if you miss your tax payment, and that's a 14% interest on your back payment. So it's consistent with what we already have in town for taxes. One big concern: this requires a 2/3 majority tonight in order to approve it. So for every argument, there are pros and there are cons. The pros: it's based on an existing program to provide emergency low-interest loans to those who need it. I don't think all these customers of Assabet Water realized they would end up in this predicament. We certainly didn't see it coming. The state, through our legislators, through the governor, through all of the Senate and the House of Representatives, made this happen in 2 months. That's unprecedented. I've never seen anything like it before. It leverages an existing program, so it's not inventing something new that's untested or untried. The state has this program in place already. And it does not affect the town's levying or borrowing limits. It's completely independent. Cons: you gotta borrow the money up front. Some people don't feel comfortable with that. Secondly, we do have additional administrative burden. This program, by statute, has to be administered by the Board of Health, and it'll be done very much in cooperation with our town administrator. And they're very busy people already. We know that it's going to cost some: filing deeds, maybe some legal fees, getting agreements signed, but that's where the 2% comes into play, to cover that cost. And there's always risk of default. We can't guarantee that every single person who takes out this loan will pay it back. You never know. But we try to do everything we can to mitigate that risk. So what happens if we don't get a 2/3 vote tonight? Well, as I mentioned earlier, it looks like Assabet Water will be filing for bankruptcy next week. That's bad. We understand this is not the best economic environment for anyone. Some people have been putting it off because they just don't have the means. This is one way of providing the means so that they can get their wells dug as quickly as possible. If it doesn't get passed tonight, that may impede them from digging a well at all and delaying the transition. That in turn could cause a potential public safety emergency. If you don't have water, your house is condemned. You got to get out. And I would think the administrative burden would probably be a lot more having to deal with that than administering a program that we are very familiar with in terms of the state. I would like to conclude that if we approve this at town meeting tonight, I was assured by our town administrator that he would start taking calls tomorrow. Thank you. I believe we have representatives from the Harvard Acres Water Board.
I believe Jamie Monat
Thank you, Mr.
would like to
Moderator.
make the first statement from the Harvard Acres Water Board, I believe.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Thank you for that excellent presentation. My name is Jamie Monat. I live at 8 Conant Drive, and I am the chairman of the Harvard Acres Water Board. Article 1 is a great deal, and the Harvard Acres Water Board supports it strongly. The Assabet Water Company, which has provided water to the 180 homes in Harvard Acres, is filing for bankruptcy. As Laura said, they intend to file next week, and it's going to be a Chapter 7. Within a few months, at most, the water will be turned off. Therefore, we in Harvard Acres have all been drilling wells like mad, although some of us have delayed because we simply can't afford it. The average well costs about $10,000. Some of my friends and neighbors in Harvard Acres have been out of work for a year. Some have been out for more than a year, 2 years, 3 years. Some have maxed out their credit card debt, and some are struggling to put kids through college. No one is prepared for this $10,000 expense. And without this loan program, some people would actually be forced to sell their homes and leave the neighborhood because they cannot come up with the $10,000 for a well. Article 1 provides for low-interest loans that would allow homeowners to install wells and finance the well at a monthly rate about equal to what they are currently paying for water. This is accomplished at negligible exposure to the town and the taxpayers, since administrative costs, legal fees, and potential defaults are all covered by the 2% interest charged. This is a great deal. It allows all homeowners to install wells, it minimizes the town's exposure, and a lot of people, notably Kate Hogan, have worked very hard to pass this legislation. If passed, the loan application process would begin tomorrow. The Harvard Acres Water Board strongly supports Article 1 and recommends a vote in favor. Thank you.
Do we have any other debate on this article?
Mr. Moderator?
Would you like to introduce yourself?
Yeah, Malcolm Fitzpatrick, 323 Great Road. I commend the town and Harvard Acres residents for this, but my reading of the article does not limit it to residences. And the words operation in there includes electricity, I believe. And I know the golf course was a consumer of the Assabet water. So my question is, are they going to be included as one of the recipients of the well? And are we going to pay for the electricity cost of the water going on to the golf course?
I believe Mr. Wrigley can answer that.
With respect to any, what I define as incidental costs, and the intent of the language here is to identify and define incidental costs, any electrical work that's required, say an upgrade in your electrical panel is what's really intended here, so that there'll be a fully functional system. It doesn't intend to pay utility bills, and it won't pay utility bills. I mean, what comes across my desk for approval is going to have to be direct and certain, not remote, not speculative. If I'm not persuaded there's a nexus between what that bill says and clearly what would be an obvious incidental cost to put a well in, it won't get paid for. With respect to the golf course, they are and have been a client of Aspet Water Company, technically eligible, but they, in fact, had a well already in the ground years ago, wanted to source their own water, and it was DEP that forced them onto the Aspet Water Company. So my understanding is they can go back to that well and make it functional. So I think that answers both of the questions.
I guess then, Bill, is that going to enable them to have a public water supply there? And are they, I'd like some assurance that they're not going to come under this loan program.
Well, I believe they're eligible for this if, in fact, they, as a customer of Aspet Water Company, had to drop a well. But as I said, they have a well.
Right.
Okay, they don't need to get a loan to drop a well because they have one. If they came to me with an incidental cost, say an upgrading to the electrical panel or a trenching work for the well because it's to engage that well, to make it active, they would be eligible as a customer of Aspet Water Company. They would fall under the same terms and conditions with the same caps on all the numbers. But they face the same problem technically that all the residents do, and they have no better capacity from my perspective than the rest. And so I would make them eligible for what their needs might be, but dropping a well is not one of them.
I guess
we have another person over here that wishes to speak.
John O'Connell, is that on?
Yes.
John O'Connell, 5 Adams Drive, Somas. I would just like to point out, as many others may, that I've got a well in. I need a couple more sample testings of the water, which will be undertaken within the next 7 or 8 days. But the water well is completely done, and I am not going to seek a loan for $10,000 or any amount, and therefore one of those $10,000 loans will not be requested by me. So I recommend passage of this article as read. Thank you.
Yes, sir.
Hello, James Gray, 26 Faxon Drive. You speak of wells. You also do mean, do you not, a septic system or something? No, you do not. How does this potable water, once disposed of, how does it return? Is this strictly wells?
Strictly wells.
They all, these people all, that was, oh. Okay, fine.
So do we have any other questions or comments? Okay, let me just reiterate a couple major differences between what is in your warrant and the motion in front of you is it's a loan from the state, so it's not raising taxes or some of the language in the article was raise and appropriate or appropriate and transfer. That means take other town money or raise taxes. This is a loan from the state. It's for $1 million, not the $750,000 in your warrant. It is authorized by the state by a special act that's already been passed. The treasurer will be responsible for the loan under the direction of the Selectmen, and the program, I believe I heard, will be run by the Board of Health and the town administrator. And I believe that's the major differences. This will take, as Laura Spear mentioned, a 2/3 vote. The reason is because it's a loan. Even though it's a loan from the state, that still requires a 2/3 vote. So all in favor, please raise your cards. Thank you. All opposed? I see 1, 2, 3. Clearly in excess of 2/3, almost unanimous. So I'll call that as in excess of 2/3. Now I'm going to step down and take a break while Gary Horowitz moderates Article 2. There's a notebook underneath. Actually, there's a notebook if you need to have extra paper.
Okay, we're going to move on to Article 2. People that are exiting, please try to be as quiet as possible. Do we have a motion on Article 2? Mr. Salvi.
Mr. Moderator, I move that the town vote pursuant to Mass General Laws, Chapter 40, Section 15A, and other applicable law, to authorize a portion of the real estate currently under the care, custody, and control of the Board of Selectmen for use as open space and recreational purposes, and located at Deerfield Lane, Stowe, Massachusetts, Assessor's Parcel ID U11-039C-1, said real property consisting of 13.45 acres, more or less, be used in conjunction with the development of a public water supply, including, but not limited to, authorizing the Board of Selectmen to sell or enter into a long or short-term lease of all or a portion of said parcel for the purposes of development of a public water supply, and including the grant of approval to construct and install all surface and subsurface infrastructure and equipment necessary for the development of a public water supply. Such plans and programs for the development of the public water supply and or lease or sale of said land for the purposes of developing a public water supply, to be determined and carried out by the Board of Selectmen, and further, that the Board of Selectmen are empowered to take any steps required by law to obtain approval for the use of said real property for the above described purposes, provided, however, that prior to commencing any of the activities or actions described above, the Board of Selectmen or their designee shall file a petition with and receive approval from the General Court or other agency of the Commonwealth pursuant to guidelines, if any, established by the Commonwealth to modify the terms of the conservation restriction running with said parcel and or the restrictions imposed by operation of Article 97 of the Massachusetts Constitution to provide for the uses authorized by this motion.
Second. Okay, we have a motion and a second. I just want to highlight two things before we have a presentation. This is a single parcel of land currently under the control of the Board of Selectmen. It has a conservation restriction on it that does not permit the use of the land for a public water supply. And the motion that was made is to allow that particular use subject to getting the proper approvals with the state and with the town. So what we're talking about is potentially changing the use of that land. Okay? I think Ms. Spear has a presentation. Oh, I'm sorry, Board of Finance Committee. A recommendation on the motion.
Richard Connolly, Associate Member of the Finance Committee. The Finance Committee recommends approval of this article. The potential use of this land for a public water supply would have no impact on the town's budget or the tax rate.
Thank Okay, we have a presentation from Ms. Spear who's going to tell us all the details that are involved here.
This is a short one.
You've got a
2
hard
slides.
act to follow from the first article, but I'm sure you'll do it.
So, many of you are probably very aware that we've been trying to get some type of water supply for the lower village. We're finding that increasing regulation is making it difficult for buildings or businesses to continue operating. They can't expand because they don't have the space needed to increase their wellhead, which is required to increase their water supply. We have tried numerous options. Years ago, the Board of Selectmen had asked the town administrator and a working group that he formed to look into different options. Well, here we are, several years later, we're still looking at different options. And we seem to be running out of options. This seems to be probably the most likely and feasible alternative that we have. And that is to look at the Deerfield Lane parcel that you see identified up here. It's in the lower village area. It's an open space area that has a conservation restriction on it, as the deputy moderator had identified. This open space resulted because the Deerfield Lane development is what we call a PCD, a planned conservation development. It's clustered. And when you have that kind of development, you have to have at least 60% of that parcel be in open space. So we have the land. We'd like to use it as a potential water supply, but there are all kinds of steps that we have to take. One of them involves town meeting. And before I go to the next slide to talk about those steps, I want to make sure everyone is clear. When we talk about a public water supply, we are not talking about a municipal water supply. Doesn't rule it out, but when we say public water supply, we're using the definition that the state uses, which means you have at least 15 services hooked up to it, or you're servicing at least 25 people for 60 days a year. So if you live in Meeting House, you have a public water supply. Juniper Hills, you have a public water supply. So I hope everyone understands what we're talking about is the opportunity to provide water to more than just a single home. Okay, click. So there are many, many steps, and I want to give credit to Kathy Sfera of the Conservation Commission who put these steps in place. Because this has a conservation restriction, it is subject to something called Article 97. Some of you may know what that is, others may not. Article 97 was an amendment to the state constitution created specifically for the right to a clean environment. And there are some land disposition policies as part of that to protect open space. So when you have a conservation restriction that is applicable to Article 97, you have a whole bunch of barriers so that you can't do anything to that land. The first step, if we really wanted to move forward with having this be potentially a water supply parcel, would be to have the Conservation Commission vote to say, yep, we're in favor of amending the existing conservation restriction. The Conservation Commission did just that through a unanimous vote on October 19th. They voted that they would be in favor of modifying that conservation restriction for use as a public water supply, period. That means all the other restrictions remain in place. You could not develop the land. The only thing that changes would be that use. It still would be open space, but with a well. The second step would be to transfer the parcel to the custody and control of the Board of Selectmen. So for this particular parcel, the Board of Selectmen had ownership of it. They had control of it. And they gave temporary care and custody to the Conservation Commission. This was not done at town meeting. Therefore, the Board of Selectmen had the right to go, nope, we want to take it back. And we did that at the October 26th meeting that we had. So now we're at step 3. And all we're doing is removing barriers so that we can look at this and see if there really is an opportunity here. At town meeting, we have to vote to say, yep, we think this might be a good parcel that we should potentially look at as a public water supply. If we approve this tonight, and it requires a 2/3 vote, there are a whole bunch of other steps that we need to take. Conservation Commission will need to have to draft a proposed alternative amendment to that conservation restriction and present it to the state. The state would take a look at it. They would determine, yeah, we think that looks good, or, you know, there are plenty of other alternatives in that area. So they would determine whether that there might be a possibility. Then, should we decide, okay, the use has changed, there is someone who may want to actually be the operator and put a public water supply and operate it on that parcel. It would require a full public hearing by the planning board. And the planning board would have to amend the special permit and subdivision approval for that development at Deerfield Lane. At the time it was created, it was called Crescent Farms. So it would require a modification to that Crescent Farms special permit and subdivision approval. Once we get through all of that, so there's lots of opportunity for public input in helping to shape and form whatever that might look like. If we get through all of that, it's got to go back up to the state. It's got to go through legislature. It's got to be approved by the governor. The state would have final review and approval of the amended conservation restriction, which would then be signed and filed with the Registry of Deeds. Long process, lots of steps. We're at step 3. So again, we're not saying, yes, we're going to have a public water supply there right now, and that's what we're voting for. What we're doing is removing the barriers so we have that opportunity for further conversation. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Beer. Okay, we now have discussion on the motion.
Dick Mortensen from Heather Lane. Wonder if you can give us any idea of the timetable to get to the last step that you just described. Roughly, I mean, is that a 1 year, 2 year?
I'm going to, Mr. Moderator, if I could defer to the Conservation Commission representative, Kathy Sfera.
Okay, Kathy.
Kathy Sparrow, 583 Great Road. I also did want to just present the Conservation Commission's position on the article, but to answer the question first, I think in part it depends on how much of a hurry we're in. So you saw with the Harvard Acres legislation, we were able to get that through in a very quick time frame. I would expect that this would take a little bit longer than that, but I think a lot of the work is in identifying the operator of a water supply before, you know, we're sort of galloping at the gates trying to get this done. Bill, I don't know if you want to add anything further.
I'm sorry, I can't hear very well, and I couldn't hear that. I was looking for...
I think clearly if the town were motivated and had identified a prospective lessee, we could get all this done, say, by the May town meeting. The Article 97 legislative approval essentially is subject to and contingent upon the community supporting it and the other steps being taken. I think at that point we ask Representative Kate Hogan to submit the proper language. I believe the general court would be supportive of this if the community was, but that's my own take on it.
Thank you. So Kathy, you want to present the Conservation Commission's take on this? Go ahead.
Okay, thanks. Laura did such a good job on the main presentation, she left me with very little to say. But the Conservation Commission has voted unanimously in favor of amending the conservation restriction on the Deerfield Lane open space. In making that vote, there were really 3 aspects to this that we looked at. One, that we felt that a well on the parcel would be compatible with the conservation values of the property. 2, that the town really has chosen to pursue an approach with the least impact on the open space, on the conservation land, by simply amending the conservation restriction, which would leave the land itself available as open space and prevent the use of the parcel for any other development. And then thirdly, that we really felt that the town has engaged in a thorough search for water supply. One of the key tests is that alternatives have been examined, and there have been many, many alternatives that have been looked at, as Laura mentioned in her presentation, including other conservation land, which we felt was less suitable than the Deerfield Lane parcel. The last thing I wanted to mention is we did get a question about trail use of the property and whether that use would be able to continue if a well were put on the property. The current conservation restriction provides for a network of walking trails on the property. And in fact, this parcel really is a key linkage in the Town of Stow's Emerald Necklace Walking Trail project. So we would anticipate that any well on the property would need to be designed and installed so as to maintain those walking trail uses. Thanks.
Thank you.
Ernie Dodd, Planning Board. I have a problem with the motion as it is read. The word sell, it appears twice. This land cannot be sold. It can be leased but not sold. Therefore, I propose that we amend it by deleting reference to selling.
Ernie, could you just, I see one sale.
There's two. Sell and sale. Sale and sell.
I'm looking for the second.
It's down on the
Oh, I see it, to sell.
It's open space for the
1,
PCD,
2, 3,
therefore
4, 5,
it
6.
remains
Seventh
at
line
PCD.
down. And then the bottom line. So the specifics of the amendment would be to delete the word sell, to enter into a long...
Or, to sell or can be deleted. So authorize, enter into a long-term or short-term water
lease,
whatever term lease.
And
the
delete
one,
or sale.
Right. And the second one, you'd get rid of the and/or, get rid of the or, and then the second or, sale of said land.
So it would read and lease of
said land.
Said land. Okay, so let's make sure everyone's on the same page. I think we can take care of this up here. Is that okay with you, John, if we do this by... So, seventh line down after Mr. Moderator. Oh, wait, you guys have a different 1, 2, 3, 4. They're reading from the warrant. These guys do, but not the audience. So I'm going back to the warrant now to make sure we can... So in the warrant, which most of the individuals here have, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. On the sixth line, we are going to erase the proposed amendment is authorization to enter into a long or short-term lease. And I can't find it again. You said... Okay, the 11th line, public water supply, the development of the public water supply, and lease of said land. Okay, so we're now discussing the proposed amendment. Is there a second? Okay. So all discussion now, we're going to deal with the amendment to delete those two references to sale. And then we'll go back to the main motion, but first we have to deal with the amendment. So are the comments here about the proposed amendment? If not, just wait till we get back to them. Let's deal with the amendment first.
Okay, well, I did have a concern about the selling as well, and I have other issues as well that I'm very concerned about, so I guess I'll mention that. I'm very concerned about the selling. We don't know who this land will be sold to and what will be happening after it's sold. What if they go bankrupt? What will happen to the land then? I think that if we are going to be using this as a public water supply, that this should be staying in the town's hands and not be sold.
So you would be voting in favor of the amendment?
Well, no, I have a lot of concerns. I'm voting against it. But if it was to happen, no, I have a lot.
Well, but remember, we're talking now about the amendment.
Okay, so I'll come back then.
Oh, we didn't get your name and address. That was my fault.
Amy Milne, 27 Deerfield Lane.
Okay, thank you. Any more discussion on the proposed amendment? Yes?
I'm Mark Jones. I'm at 203 Boxborough Road. I'm in favor of also not authorizing the Board of Selectmen to sell the land. I think the town should take the 50 and 100-year perspective on this land, and there may be a time in which we need to draw more water from the land, or we may have other entities that may wish to draw upon the water than the people that we have in mind right now. So for the time being, I wish that if the Board of Selectmen wishes to sell the land, they come again before the town meeting and ask specifically for authorization to do that. That means I am for the amendment.
Thank you. Any other comments regarding the proposed amendment? Prior to it being moved, there was a discussion with the town council, John Whitten, and this amendment is within the four corners because it makes the main motion more restrictive. So just want to clarify that for everybody. Town council has already passed judgment on the fact that this is an acceptable amendment. Doesn't mean you have to take it, means that it's okay for us to be discussing. So any further discussion on the proposed amendment? I see one person raising his hand.
Joe Kiefler, Deerfield, Maine. Yes, I have a question about the amendment. If it were a sale before the amendment, then it's clear who operates the property. It's whoever owns it. With a lease, if we change the term to the lease, which I think I'm more in favor of, what's the term of that lease? How long? And is there any kind of I don't know, financial stipulation? Can this just be leased to some brother-in-law for $1 for 150 years? I mean, is there some kind of like common sense going on that governs that?
Okay, so I think we're going to hold that. I guess we can answer it now, but technically it's a little bit outside the discussion here about the amendment. The main motion says into a long or short-term lease. It doesn't define the period of that lease. Would you like to comment, Bill?
That's a term that would be negotiated. I think it's important to note that for any prospective lessee, or more importantly, a buyer, I mean, what we're asking people to do is to secure and protect a water source for its property, and as logic would dictate, sale would be preferable to them. Clearly short of that, then a negotiation, the longer term lease, the more secure they would feel. I mean, we're not talking about a home improvement or a recreation facility. We're talking about a basic service here. So it becomes by degree more difficult to reach an agreement when you go to a lease, and clearly anything short of a longer term lease, I guess if I'm sitting on that side looking for water, it becomes a discouragement, I would think.
So that brings up an interesting question. Does the Finance Committee and/or the Board of Selectmen have a position on the amendment as proposed? I'm going to let them think that through. And any other discussion on the proposed amendment to preclude the use of the term sale or sell?
Mr. Moderator, if I may.
Yes.
It seems to me that in the course of negotiating an agreement with a prospective buyer or lessee, the town has the flexibility to write in restrictions on how the property is going to be used. And I think to Bill's point, if we have the ability to either lease or sell the property, it gives us more flexibility in terms of people that might be interested in working with the piece of real estate in hand here. So I guess I'm looking at it from the standpoint of the ability of the town to write in specific restrictions on how the land's going to be used, whether it's sold or leased. And that way we have protection, unless I'm missing something here.
So would you like to characterize how you would propose people vote on the amendment?
Well, I guess if one agrees that you get more flexibility with both a possible lease and a sale, you would vote the amendment down.
Okay. Yes.
Stephen Quinn from the Planning Board. I think with respect to selling
I don't think
the
they can
land-
hear you, Steve.
With respect to selling the land, the bylaw is pretty specific on ownership. 8510 only allows basically 3 owners: the town, a nonprofit organization whose principal purpose is the conservation of open space, or a corporation, a trust owned or to be owned by the owners of the lots or residential, basically a homeowners association. And I think the bylaw is fairly specific on ownership of the parcel.
Which bylaw is that again?
8510.
Is it referenced in
zoning
here?
bylaw, 8510.
Okay. Did everyone get that? I don't think people heard you. Could you say that again louder? Get the microphone right into your mouth.
The bylaw, the zoning bylaw 8510 is fairly specific on ownership of the open space of a PCD. It allows for either the town of Stowe, a nonprofit organization whose principal purpose is conservation of open space, or a corporation or trust owned or to be owned by the owners of lots of the residential units within the PCD, are basically a homeowners association.
Okay, so the people who could be to whom the parcel could be sold are limited to those three entities because of the town's bylaws. Thank you for that clarification. Finance Committee, any recommendation with respect to the amendment?
Yes, sir. Is this not on? Hello?
Still can't hear. Maybe try this other one.
Hello? There
Yep.
we go. The Finance Committee does not support the amendment as we feel it becomes more restrictive rather than less. It makes working a solution more difficult.
Thank you. Further discussion on the proposed amendment? Malcolm.
Mr. Moderator, I suggest strongly that we favor this amendment. It in no way, as Steve suggests, restricts any sale in terms of the water itself. You can always actually, as owners of the land, sell the water rights underneath it without selling the land itself. So sale of land is what we are amending on this, not the sale of the water as the rights to it. Therefore, I strongly suggest we support this amendment, and as Steve here on Planning Board just suggests, there are overlying restrictions on this land, both by the Conservation Commission, which are being addressed, and the PCD, which the Planning Board has authority over. And therefore, in a way, these words sale or for sale in this motion add a certain conflict within the distribution of the rights of that property. I think it makes it much more clear to take these words out and proceed, and if the sale of the water underneath the land is a requirement, then the selectmen should come back to the town meeting for that privilege. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. More discussion on the amendment?
Ewan Milne, 27 Deerfield Lane.
I can't hear you, sorry. Get the microphone very close to your mouth.
Ewan Milne, 27 Deerfield Lane. I do not want to give the selectmen the opportunity or authority to sell this parcel of land. I believe the neighborhood was developed as a PCD with the intention that the land be kept as open space. And so I don't support the idea of selling the land to a company or entity that would develop it by means unspecified for a water source. I don't necessarily disagree with the need for a water source, even a water source on this property. But I would encourage the town to vote in favor of the amendment to remove the language to allow the land to be sold.
Thank you. Further discussion on the amendment? Okay, hearing and seeing none, we can move to the vote on the amendment. This will require a majority for approval of the amendment. The amendment we're voting on is to strike from the main motion the words sale and to sell, to preclude those, any sale, yes?
Sorry, I just have one question before we move it to a vote. Is it, if the idea of selling it goes out, what's the probability of finding someone to do this? Does it drop from 80% down to 10? I mean, does this kill the entire thing?
I'm not sure anyone can answer that, but...
But I think they have opinions. Let's hear them.
I think that's the question, and I don't know the answer. As I'm sitting here, I'm thinking that the motion authorizes us to sell, certainly doesn't require us to sell, but we could only sell within the confines of the bylaw. Now, that may not be possible, but again, this is to authorize us for a possible solution. You know, maybe a nonprofit land trust could in some point in the future own it, but they lease it. So I think you're right that that's the question, is does restricting what we can do with it make our chances of getting water lower? I tend to go on the side of fewer restrictions because I think the bylaw protects us from what you guys don't want to happen. That's just my opinion.
Well, you've already been looking for people to purchase this, and you haven't been very successful, right? Do you have people lined up? I mean, it's difficult, right? Or are there people lined up? Is that something you can disclose?
Mr. Wrigley?
The difficulty to begin with was that we initially identified this site 4 years ago as the preferred site on a cost benefit. Not surprising, laying water main is $200 per linear foot in place. So the further you get, the further your source is located from your customers, in some cases it becomes prohibitively high. But in any event, we were asked to go through a due diligence process to look at every other plausible solution providing water to the lower village. And we have now come full circle and come back. I have not had a great deal of discussion with multiple plausible or reasonable lessees or buyers, so I can't give you a percentage on what it does. I just know by definition, if I'm sitting where someone else is sitting and they're looking for a water source, control is key, and so you can do the rest of it, I think.
Okay. Any further discussion? Yes.
Yes. Mark Jones again. I would just like to remark that it's possible to change the bylaws so that they are, in the long run, not necessarily that restrictive. If there's a 40B or a elder housing entity that wishes to have control of the land and perhaps in a purchasing kind of frame of mind, it's certainly possible for this town meeting as well as the Board of Selectmen to change the bylaws in order to make that possible. So in the long run, that's really not an impediment. But I think in the long run, in terms of having this asset, water, a scarce thing in our town, we've got 3 crises in our town for water. Boone, Lower Village, as well as Harvard Acres, where I have troublesome water. I think it's in our town's interest to retain control of this valuable asset. There is going to be a time when our population is much higher and we need more water that we're going to have to be looking to drill for water in this parcel and others for many entities, many users. And I just encourage everybody to look at this from the perspective that we may have a longer term interest as a town in this parcel than just the immediate potential users that are building or hoping to build a house or structure in the next few years.
I have a question as the moderator. Is the statement true that the bylaw under which this PCD occurred, could that in fact be amended retrospectively? Yes, okay. Town council says yes, the planning board is still talking about it, so I think that's an important point to clarify. Town meeting could change the bylaw.
Good evening, Mr. Moderator. Thank you. Mr. Moderator, the zoning bylaw can always be amended. It's a 2/3 vote of town meeting. Whether or not it would affect that particular subdivision, we'd have to look at the subdivision approval, the deeds to those residences, and whether they own any portion of the open space. So I think that question is probably best not addressed through town meeting, because certainly the zoning bylaw could be changed, the planning board's approval could be changed. One of the requirements that's on the board is that the planning board would have to revote the approved plan to begin with. I think the issue is, what are the voters being asked tonight to vote on? What authority would the selectmen be given should you vote this article? And the authority is simply to modify, I say simply, but simply in terms of its narrowness, to modify the conservation restriction. So even if the voters were to approve this motion without the amendment, the Selectmen's authority would be narrowly tailored to petitioning the legislature to allow the conservation restriction to be amended solely for the purpose of developing a water supply. All of the open space attributes of the parcel would be preserved, all the recreational attributes would be preserved. The Selectmen's authority that you're being asked to vote on tonight is limited very, very narrowly to modifying the conservation restriction to allow for a water supply. And that wouldn't differ whether the parcel were sold or whether the parcel was leased. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. All right, any further discussion on the amendment? Malcolm?
Yeah, I'd like to point out that leaving in the word sell or sale is for the entire parcel. Now, the question is, are we trying to get a water supply in the central part of Stowe? And I think it's needed, but we don't need to sell any of that parcel. We just need to give them rights to get on that land, to put up a structure, to drill a well, and to have some foreseeable right to withdraw the water in the future. As the gentleman over here on the far side said, this is our parcel. We have a right to protect and protect its future use. I might point out that I tried to get the town to buy entire Crescent Farm when it was on a government sale list when the prior owner went bankrupt, and the Selectmen did not have the foresight to buy it. So we got it, let's keep it, let's use it for recreation and conservation and also for the withdrawal of water, but we don't need those words sale or for sell in there.
Okay. Let's move on to the vote then. We are now voting not on the main motion, but simply on the amendment. And the amendment as proposed is to delete the words sale and sell to make this more restrictive. This requires a majority to pass. All those in favor of the amendment to remove sale from the motion, please raise your cards. This is for all those in favor. All those opposed? I think it's pretty clearly a majority. Yes. We'll do it one more time just to be sure. All those in favor? Hold those cards up high. All those opposed? Yes. It's clearly a majority. Okay. The amendment passes. We are now moving to discussion of the main motion as amended. So the sale of the land is off the table. We're now talking about the main motion. Discussion on the main motion. Go ahead.
On the main motion, Amyville and Deerfield Lane, I have a number of concerns and questions, particularly in light of everything that's been going on at Harvard Acres. As a owner on Deerfield Lane, what guarantee would we have that they would not force us to join this public water supply, which I believe people have been forced within Assabet? You raise the amount of money they charge repeatedly, draw down our wells, and go bankrupt and leave us in a similar situation that Harvard Acres is in right now. So I have concerns about that. I also have concerns about the fact that how are they going to actually get all the machinery back into that land, because all of our property is in front of it. How do they propose getting the equipment and machinery back there? The other concern I have is that this is conservation land. As a town, we have been committed to conserving our land, and this is land that we already own as conservation land and is being used by numbers of kids and families as conservation land. My daughter when she read in the paper what was happening, she said, you know, she was just almost in tears thinking that something would happen to the land back there, because she says it's so beautiful hiking back there in the winter. This is the purpose. You know, when we bought the land, we were told this conservation land would be there. We were always hoping that since the builder didn't put the trails in, that the town would. But I think that we need to keep the conservation land that we have, and I feel that there's a lot of questions that have not been answered about what could happen with you know, the water source and who owns it and what happens, and how do we know that they're not going to go in this present economy bankrupt just like the Assabet Water Valley.
Thank you. Let's get a few more comments and then answer. Go ahead.
Gary Small, 107 Lowell Drive.
We can't hear.
So Gary Small, 107 Lowell Drive. I remember repeatedly hearing that the town was not interested in getting into the water business. And that was a primary reason why there was avoidance of taking over responsibility of Assabet Water, leaving those of us there to reach into our own pockets at $10,000 a pop to sink our own wells. Now the question isn't this, looking at this conservation land purchase with the sole purpose of creating a public water supply, sounds as though the town wants to get into the water business. Now my question is, if this is going to be a well that will ultimately provide water to the town facilities and perchance to public people, to the public living around that area, since we paid for our own wells at the expense of watching Assabet Water go under in an attempt to bring the water down to the village, do we also have to pay taxes to put in the pipes to supply water to the rest of the town as well?
Okay, so let's answer some of these questions. Bill, would you like to start?
I would. Well, I wouldn't, but I will. As to the question of expectations under a lease agreement, this authorizes the board to negotiate all terms and conditions. Clearly, there would be no term or condition of any lease that the board would be executing that would require anybody to become a customer of this private water company, and that's what it would be. That relates to the question raised here. The town of Stowe had no involvement, no agreement, no expectation of any kind, real or imagined, with regard to Assabet Water Company. The fact of the matter is, the town of Stowe provides water to all of its town buildings and its schools. We're in the water business, as is everybody else. We're in the public water business because of the number of people we provide water to. We looked at Assabet Water Company as a prospective customer. We decided that it wouldn't make any sense to us as a prospective customer, and that was the authority that was given to us a year ago, last October, where the town meeting voters trusted us to negotiate with Assabet Water Company only if and when it became obvious to us that the terms and conditions that we could negotiate made any sense, financially or otherwise, and it didn't, so we did not join. That would be the case here. If there's a prospective private water company in existence now or may come into existence that wish to, a long-term lease in this event now, to provide water to customers, if the town of Stowe is in need of water, we would look at that as a prospective customer, but we're not getting into the water business. We may be a customer of somebody who is currently in the business or may start the business. Otherwise, we continue to serve water ourselves and do so with desperate improvements somewhere. But we're looking at an alternative to that now. But that's essentially it. We're a customer, either our own customer or somebody else's, but we wouldn't own or operate.
There were two other points that that individual made. She was curious about guarantees about the machinery and their properties. Can we make any statement about that?
When we first looked at this property 4 years ago, the working group, we went down, walked the sites. We're obviously aware of the restrictions on that site, talked with some of the neighbors. If we look at the Zone 1, influence based on what we were estimating to be the needs in the lower village put us at the largest Zone 1. Then we walked the site, looked at the least intrusive approach to drive the line and a large enough road opening to maintain and support that line, imagining a single well with little or no treatment facility that goes with it, and the ancillary appurtenances such as a fence to protect that well. But the trees that would need to come down along that sliver of land that you saw to get out on the Samuel Prescott, but to be as least intrusive as possible. But clearly we need to get equipment down to service a well if the pump goes or something to that effect, but to do nothing else to disturb the land. And so it would be minimal obstruction simply to service that line, and that would be what we'd negotiate with a lessee now and get in advance terms and conditions, provisions to set that course.
Before you, wait. There was also a question about the current conservation uses of the land and whether they would change as a result of
I'll hand that question off to someone in
Planning Board?
conservation. I don't think there's an
Conservation
intent to
Commission?
change the use.
It's still going to be restricted in the same way. The conservation restriction would exist. It's only for the purposes of a public water supply. So everything else that's permitted and restricted would remain intact. We're going to let somebody, tradition here is to let somebody else speak, and then you can speak again.
Tim Reed, 137 Red Acre Road. Mr. Moderator, I haven't heard any technical aspects about this water supply. Is there a known value of how many gallons are going to be drawn from it? What the nature of the aquifer is underneath there? What the recharge rate is? And what the impact would be on neighboring wells? Has there been a hydrological study done of this area?
I'm going to let somebody closer to it answer that question. Bill, would you like to handle that?
I'm not aware of any specific hydrogeological work for that site. What is available and strongly supports a well is the entire area, what is servicing by wells now. The studies that have been done in the past that indicate that there's clearly a large amount of water in that area. There's no indication based on the facts of wells that is in that area that isn't the case, but that would be the due diligence that would be required of a prospective lessee, before, it seems to me, before they'd be certain enough to sign a long-term lease.
Well, as a member of town meeting who probably is not close enough to that area to be impacted, but one never knows when one's dealing with what's underground, as the people at Harvard Acres have certainly found out when they started drilling their wells. I'm a little reticent to vote in favor of a project like this when I might be putting neighbors at risk in terms of the wells that they've already dug and how that might impact their water.
There clearly is some risk here, and I just want to let you know in the 4 years I've worked on this, and I was asked by the Planning Board, the Lower Village Committee, and the Selectmen to do this, it was only to provide our neighbors with water. I mean, that's what this is. This isn't about, it's about the businesses in the Lower Village, it's about prospective affordable housing, it's a perspective, it's all the people who are now in Stowe, and that's the only purpose. So it's to help one neighbor at perhaps the small risk of another neighbor. That statement's probably true.
Mike, can I ask you to put one of Laura's slides back up? Yeah. So let's keep in mind here that we're not talking about the details of the public water supply here. What we're talking about is step, was it 3 of all of these steps? They don't want to do any of the other things unless town meeting gives the authority to look into it. That's why not all the information is available here tonight. No commitments are being made, no negotiations have taken place. This is just to enable them to proceed. Let's go over to this microphone.
Hi.
Yep.
Eleanor Recco, 37 Robert Road.
A little closer to your mouth so that...
Sorry. Eleanor Recco, 37 Robert Road. And I just wanted to raise the notion of thinking long-term. And years ago, I attended public forums hosted by the Lower Village Planning Committee, speaking about the need for traffic calming measures and roundabouts in front of Lower Village. And I'm just wondering, if we grow businesses in Lower Village, won't it bring more traffic? And would bringing water to Lower Village be working at cross purposes to the efforts to calm the traffic in Lower Village? And I just wanted to put that out there to think about.
Thank you.
And linear retailing, I believe that linear retailing solved their water problem, the Shaw's Plaza, right? So I just wanted to say
Okay.
that. Thanks.
Yes. Keep the microphone as close to your mouth as you can so everyone can hear.
Lori Clark, 39 Bradley Lane. I have 2 questions, both related to risks. So earlier somebody asked, would there be a chance that they would be forced onto this public supply if we did create it? And the answer was that the town of Stowe would not force any. But do we see a risk there that DEP would eventually force somebody onto it? That was my first question about risk. And my second question has to do with, given all that we've learned, or I hope we've learned, about the Assabet water in Harvard Acres, I'd like to know what assurances or what steps would the selectmen take to ensure that we actually enter into business with a company that is a more stable company, because it was only a little while ago that I was asked at a planning board meeting to give an opinion of whether the town should enter into business with Assabet Water. And so, I mean, we didn't get that far, but we were going to, and I think it was not, from a business standpoint, a viable company to be doing business with.
Okay, thank you. Bill, would you answer those two questions again?
I'll answer the second one first.
Okay.
It was precisely the result of our due diligence that persuaded us not to go with Assabet Water Company. So on the face of it, what you do is you go through the pro forma documents, balance sheets, business plans, you do all of the things that a reasonable and informed person would do. We did that, and it was a result of that we realized that we wouldn't do business. There's always risk entering to any agreement, whether it's with a government entity or a private entity. And from my perspective, in 19 years in doing it, I've seen good business models, bad ones. I've seen good government models, bad ones. But you need to go through that due diligence process. And if you do it properly, then you've minimized the risk. I never sacrifice the good for the perfect. Once you've done as much as you can and you get that, getting to 95% takes steady work. Getting that last 5% sometimes is impossible and not worth the effort. I'm comfortable that the Board of Selectmen, before they would agree to enter into an agreement, the nature and extent of which we've just modeled here, would have done a thorough due diligence, and we wouldn't do it if it didn't make sense. I guess that's the best assurance there that we give you on that.
So the other recurrent theme is there any way that current well owners on Deerfield Lane could be forced to join a public water supply?
I'm not DEP, and I would certainly defer to anybody who's closer to this than I am, but I know for a fact that DEP's rules and regulations with respect to water continue to be recalibrated, more constrictive. I worked for an engineering firm back in the 80s, did a lot of water and wastewater work, and the master plan that was created in the late 80s, if you look at what they're doing now, they're currently leading to the day when individual wells at individual residents will fall under their purview for testing and quality. I'm giving you my honest opinion about the trends. And so I couldn't sit here and tell you at some point DEP wouldn't require all of us individually and collectively, but there'd be no legal way for these folks to require the neighbors or the town to get involved. And if DEP changes its rules and regulations, or the EPA, or together, the state somehow, if we're subject to that statute, then it could happen.
How much time do we have? Okay. Yes.
Ross Perry, 4 Circuit Drive, and also someone with a vested interest in one of the businesses in Lower Village. It's not a case of expanding businesses if we get more water. It's a case of keeping existing businesses open if we don't get more water. DEP is demanding that some of the businesses, specifically the school, tie into a public water supply, and there's no other alternative on site other than through an expanded system at Deerfield. This is a conservation land. I can't think of a better use of conservation land than to provide water. That's one reason for protecting the land. And we're not authorizing and designing wells tonight. We're just taking, as was clearly pointed out by Laura, the first step. There will be many more steps and reviews. So we're not signing a blank check tonight. We're just getting the ball rolling. And I think it's extremely urgent that we do this, or we won't be able to have the existing businesses in Lower Village, let alone any expansion. Thank you.
Thank you. Ellen?
Ellen Sturgis, 12 Canterbury Road. I actually I agree completely with what Ross just said. I just wanted to underscore that what we hear over and over again is that we're concerned about how high our taxes are in town and how are we going to reduce them. And really, the reason we don't have more businesses here is because we don't have public water. This has been an issue for years. I mean, it's been 4 years we've been waiting for this opportunity to possibly use this parcel down the conservation land. It's still going to be conservation land. It still has a conservation restriction on it. But it's going to have an opportunity to put a well on it, which will keep those businesses alive and maybe at least keep the Lower Village Mall full, because it's not going to be full. It's not going to go anywhere without a public water system.
Thank you. Yes.
I'd just like a couple clarifications.
Just re-identify yourself.
Amy Milne, 27 Deerfield Lane. Two just clarifications. One is that what guarantee would we have that our well would not go run dry if they're taking out all of this water for everyone else? Would there be an in-depth study done on how much water there is, or how would this be put forth? And the second question is they showed a brief picture of the land, but I still didn't get a clear understanding if they have determined where, if they would move the trucks and stuff, everything through, if they are going to, do it in the back of people's properties, down the street. I didn't get a clear understanding from the picture that they showed us if that has been determined or not.
Could you put the map up? Oh, sorry. It's hard to keep up with you, Mike. Bill?
It has been some time since we spoke specifically with regard to egress and approach, but I do recall that we were confident we didn't need to encroach on any of the private residential property to gain egress to and from the site, but that we could do it on that portion of the site that's available to us for that purpose. What was, I've forgotten.
I'm just
now.
trying to think of that. Is that the strip that we're talking about?
And we're looking to put it in the northeast, up in there, to site the well for the
So
zone
in the furthest corner?
Yes, up in that upper area right there where the arrow is.
And is the green?
In order to meet the zone 1, and then drag it down along that narrow line and out onto Samuel Prescott. That is what we were.
Yeah, that's public land now, right?
Yes. I believe it is, isn't it? Yes.
Yeah.
No.
So that narrow strip is now not part of anybody's property.
That's a very narrow strip that runs behind all of our properties, which people use a lot, and it would kind of, having lots of trucks and stuff go through, I think, that would probably encroach a little bit on our land, and I don't see how you can get that, because that's my question, because that's right behind our houses. And it would, would cause some damage having large trucks, going through that area.
Beyond clearing the trees, dropping the well, and then dragging the line, there would be no daily or periodic truck traffic. But yes, you need trucks to clear the egress, a driller to drop the well, and then access for any maintenance or improvement, but not regular truck traffic. Once the well is operating, there'd be periodic visits by a pickup truck in general to start with. Unless there had to be repairs to it, I don't see periodic truck traffic.
Okay, another speaker?
Eve Donahue, West Acton Road. My question is, we keep saying that this is just the beginning of the process, step 3 of a long process, and so forth, but I wonder if someone could give me an assessment of whether any decision regarding this well is going to come back to town meeting before the well actually happens, if we vote on it today.
It's a good question. Can someone answer that? Laura?
So at this point, all we're trying to do is see if we have a sense that we could explore further. When you see that bullet that says public hearing, that's the opportunity where there would be a plan presented showing access. It'd be the opportunity for the planning board to set conditions. We would have a better sense of how big or how small the scope it would be. All of that part of design would be determined as part of that whole planning board public hearing and vote to the amended special permit subdivision approval. Tonight, we're not trying to design a system. We don't have a specific location. We have an idea to see how practical it'd be. But in terms of getting input, that's where the public hearing, that's what it's designed for, just like for any other subdivision or modification to a permit.
Okay.
I remember what was the first part of that other person's question with regard to quantity of water and such. DEP's well permitting process does all of that due diligence. Once you have the test well put in the ground, the recharge, they run it for 72 hours. There's an entire state-approved system that attempts to identify and define the nature and extent of the water, its source, its recharge. The entire area is mapped. DEP has all that hydrogeological mapping. It's pretty sophisticated. Again, it's not perfect, but it won't be as though there isn't a high probability of success for whatever it's rated at before DEP will approve the permitting.
Okay, thank you.
Debbie Woods, 453 Great Road. I appreciate everybody's comments and concerns, especially the folks who are abutters. It's always difficult when something is in your backyard. I happen to have a cell tower in my backyard. The people who are abutting the school right now are struggling with the fact that it's in their backyard. Right now, the situation is Stowe needs water. And the whole reason for this article, and the reason I am personally in support of this article and would ask everybody else to be in support of this article, is because it's very important for us to keep the option open for us to have water. Again, I understand it's very hard when it's in your backyard, but again, it's for the better of the town, and it's for the good of the town, and this is only to keep that option open for us to have water. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there someone who hasn't spoken on this article yet? Have you spoken? Yep.
I'd like to move the question.
Okay. Is there a second? Moving the question means that we vote on whether to take a vote. Is there a second? Okay. All those in favor of voting on the motion under Article 2, please raise your cards. All those opposed? That clearly passes by more than 2/3. Okay, we're now moving to the main motion as amended under Article 2. This requires a 2/3 majority in order to pass. All those in favor of pursuing the process to amend the conservation restriction on the land that's part of the Deerfield Lane development, all those in favor of the motion as amended, which precludes the sale, please raise your cards. All those in favor? All those opposed? Oh, that's clearly a 2/3 majority. The motion passes as amended. And I will turn the podium back over to the elected moderator. Mr. Walrath, thank you so much for the opportunity. He's a very smart man.
I believe we have a motion for Article 3.
We do. Mr. Moderator, I move that the town vote to approve the expenditure of and appropriate and transfer the sum of $46,000 for the town's share of the cost to design to requirements specified by the Massachusetts Department of Transportation and those imposed by the Stowe Board of Selectmen, if any, on a regional basis with the towns of Maynard and Acton, with Acton managing the program, a portion of the Assabet River Rail Trail from the Stowe-Maynard Town Line to Sudbury Road. Said monies to be transferred from the Open Space and Recreation Community Preservation Fund balance.
We have a motion and a second. Do we have a report from the Finance Committee?
Mr. Moderator, the Finance Committee does not recommend approval of this warrant article. We believe that there are too many unanswered questions.
Thank you. Do we have a recommendation from Capital Planning? I believe Ross Perry was the name I was given.
This is to access an easement that we acquired a few years ago. It is utilizing CPC funds. It will be done in conjunction with the design effort in Maynard. I think this is a great opportunity that leverages CPC funds and leverages state funds, so therefore it has minimal impact on Stowe taxpayers. Capital Planning supports this article.
Thank you. I believe CPC, Bob Wilbur was going to make a comment.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. We were approached about a month ago, maybe a month and a half ago, request for $45,000 at that time. for the town's required 20% share of the design costs. We first looked at whether or not we felt that would be a allowable use of CPA funds, and we concluded very quickly that should the town decide to apply their CPA funds in that way, that would be fully allowable under the Community Preservation Act. We also looked at it in terms of a additional investment in that property. The town directed CPA funds towards the acquisition of the easement at a previous town meeting. So with that, I would turn to the main proponent, Don Rising, formerly of the Assabet River Rail Trail Committee, to make the main presentation.
Thank you, Bob. Let's go to the second slide, because we've already heard and seen the motion. Just so everybody's familiar with the area that we're talking about, the area that you see in both green and, what do you call it, magenta or red or purple, or whatever it is, they combined make up the parcel that we're talking about. We acquired the purple one in 2005 as a vote, I think, of a 2004 town meeting. And then the second parcel, which was everything else of that land along the former railroad land, we acquired actually last year when we passed papers. We voted for it in 2008. And Sudbury Road, I think, is where you have your pointer down in the lower left. So the parcel we're talking about goes all the way from Sudbury Road, almost 2 miles, about 1.9 miles, up to the Maynard Town Line, White Pond Road. And it's currently the old railroad roadbed, and everything along the river, at least on the northeast end of it. So we've got quite a bit of land involved in this, on which we have a trail easement and public access easement. We do not own the land outright. And what we're proposing to do under this motion is to start the design phase of actually laying out, designing the rail trail itself along there, which might be paved, it might not be paved, and there are variations in paving materials. The next slide shows what it looks like from the Sudbury Road end. And here, the cleared area, the width of it is about 12 feet. This was taken just last Thursday in the rain, so it's current. And it's a real pretty line through there, area through there, and a lot of you, I imagine, have walked it. The next slide shows the other end of it, which is down, well, this is near, anyway, near the White Pond Road end. And there it varies in width. That's where it was graded and is maintained now by the owners, the Albrights. And the graded area runs from 18 to maybe even 20 feet wide in some places. And there's ditches here and there along the side of it that the railroad had constructed just to keep the water under control there. So the situation, next slide, shows that we're talking about that 1.9 mile section, and the cost to design it is estimated to be $230,000. We had an earlier estimate of $210,000. I had asked for $45,000 in the motion, as in the warrant, thinking that we might need a little extra, and it turned out that when we got a little bit better updated estimate from the people who have done the design work for the Maynard, or are doing the Maynard Acton design work, and had done the design work for the Marlboro Hudson portion, they're updating it to more current prices, and that's where the $230,000 came from. Right now, the Acton Maynard part has been reactivated. The design of that has been reactivated. The state has shut it down for a while for lack of their own funds. The funds are available for the Stowe portion. Those have been earmarked, so we could access them through a vote of the Metropolitan Planning Organization and the Mass Department of Transportation. This seems like an appropriate time to do that because with the federal funds involved in this, there's a little hooker they put in there that there's a 3% rescission. That is, the amount available drops by 3% per year if we're not using it. So it would make sense to start using these monies that are available. And other than our 20% share of the design portion, the rest of it is paid actually by federal funds. So we just drop out of the picture. The next slide. What happens now in the process? The Selectmen will hold a meeting to talk about the design, what some ideas might be, what the options are, and this is the information that we can pass along and include in an RFP that we'll work on through the State Department of Transportation. And the Mass DOT will publish the RFP and seek bids on the project, and we would like to be able to combine this with the Acton Maynard portion of it. Acton has been designated as a lead community on that, which is why in this motion we're talking about our doing it along with Acton as the lead community. That could be beneficial because then all the design could be consolidated. Right now, as far as the Metropolitan Planning Organization is concerned, it's all one big bucket of funds for the three towns. So it's easier from their standpoint if everything is combined too, but still the Stowe section would be done according to whatever the town of Stowe decides it wants to have. The design process, in the next slide going on, requires a 25% design progress hearing. That is, the people who have the design contract would come in at the 25% stage, which basically is the concept portion of it. They've done enough of their design to say, this is how it might look, this is what we're thinking of doing. And what we would propose to them in the RFP is they give us several options in there. They consider several different things, whether it would be paved, not paved, whatever. But we would also include, as Acton and Maynard have, a 10% review. So that's at the idea stage. We'd get a chance to look at what their thinking are, how they are handling whatever problems there might be along the way, and have our input to the whole operation at that point. Then once the design goes on to completion, Stowe would still decide whether or not it wanted to have the construction itself proceed. We could call a halt to it at that point and not ask for the construction funds. Assuming that we do decide to go ahead, then the job goes out to bid, and presumably we would be able to start construction if we so decide in 2014, because that's when the funding is supposed to be going to be available, at least on the budget that the Metropolitan Planning Organization has. That's the 2014 is when the Maynard Acton section would be constructed as well. Okay, so I ask that you vote yes on this because it gives us a chance to find out what might be done in order to have a rail trail through there, have a trail that would be walkable and usable for bicycles, usable for people with strollers, rollerblades, whatever, to be able to go along that nice nearly 2-mile section along the river. Thank you.
Thank you. I believe Bob Wilbur had one additional comment.
Yes, Mr. Moderator, just to wrap up the CPC's presentation here, the rationale for the support of the unanimous vote this past Monday night, very high leverage for the town funds put in. You know, essentially we have an opportunity here, should the town decide to go forward with it, for 20% of the design costs we can essentially have someone else pick up the rest of the tab of the design and the construction. That's the way we're looking at it. The other key point from the committee, though, is feeling very strongly about the public input portion, the opportunity for public input. Clearly, there needs to be more of consensus building in terms of what the community wants to see on this site. So that should happen prior to even drafting of the RFP. Thank you.
So just to ask, I believe you already answered it. The Community Preservation Committee has already taken a formal vote in favor of this as required.
Yes, we have at the funding level of $46,000 based on the more up-to-date estimate.
Thank you. Any discussion? Yes, ma'am.
Mr. Moderator, Nancy Shepard, Harvard Road, Stowe. I've walked that whole trail several times with enjoyment. I have questions about the pros and cons of things related to paving. And when you say that there will come a time when people can put their input in and then a decision will be made, who will make those design decisions? Will there be another town meeting vote, or will you sort of listen and then will a smaller group make the decisions?
Could you answer that, Don?
I had asked that question too, of seeing how the other towns are doing it. And it can be the selectmen who decide. The selectmen could appoint a committee or a person who would be the point group or person with regard to the whole thing. But presumably, whoever that person or group might be is going to listen to what the town is telling, getting the input from the various hearings.
Okay, over here.
William Byron, 469 Gleasondale Road. As far as unanswered questions on this project, the only one that I can see is there's a requirement, I believe, in the purchase of the easement that to pave the full width of the maintained surface. Now, I think the rail trail is a requirement of 12 feet. And so I see us ending up with about 20 feet or so. And the only question I know of is whether or not the government funds would cover the extra footage of pavement if we paved it. Now, we purchased an easement on this property. We can't go forward with anything without a plan, and we're stuck here. You either pay for the money for the plan or you don't get anything. But if the federal funds won't pay for the extra pavement, and we do pave it, then the town, I assume, would be liable for the other remaining funding. I also can't see not paving this trail, so to put it to its best use for, you're not going to rollerblade in gravel, and all you're going to do is walk and mountain bike. But so if we want to be consistent with the surrounding rail trail, it really should be paved.
Did you want to respond to that?
Just a quick response. The speaker was pointing out that in the deed, in the town's acquisition of the easement for that, there is a requirement in there. There's some language in there that will clearly require some additional legal research to understand exactly what the requirements are relative to that language. It's not clear, is my conclusion at this point. It needs clarification. But I will say to the speaker's question, if the town decides to proceed with it, if a design firm is then hired, and if that design firm draws a design for the bike path that includes this additional paving, which may or may not be required, then that's what would be built, and that's what the federal government would pay for. If the designer pays for it and that design is accepted by the state Department of Transportation officials, then it would move on to construction and it would be paid for if it was an accepted design.
Thank you. Yes, sir.
Just a quick sanity check on these numbers. $230,000 is $250,000. I'll plan the thing for 50. I mean, anybody want to join me on this? $50,000, I'll give you a nice plan, Google Earth, the whole thing. It seems kind of amazing that to plan a bike trail costs $250,000. And I mean, I can understand you got federal funds and you got to, spend it or lose it. But those federal funds came from my pocket, just like the property taxes. All this money comes from my pocket. And I'd like to keep a little bit more of that so I can put it back into the town, buy some more buildings. I don't know, the whole idea of we got to spend this money or we'll lose it. And it's their money, it's not ours. It is our money, the whole thing is our money. I mean, I like bike trails, don't get me wrong. I'm a big fan of the outdoors. But I just sense that it's like free money, let's spend it or we'll lose it. It's our money, let's keep it.
So Don, can you address why this is expensive to plan?
Well, this what ends up in the design process is a complete engineering design, which means they have to review all the structures that are along there. And if you walk it, you don't notice that there are structures, but there are several culverts, and there's even one that has some steel stringers under it. It's not just stone culverts. One is listed as being a 1 foot by 1 foot wooden box culvert too, so I don't know what's happened to that over the 160 or 70 years since the railroad built the line. But they end up with a complete plan also for parking at the Sudbury Road end, whatever might have to be done, even landscaping along the side of it if need be. So it's a thorough engineering plan that then can be put out to bid and constructed according to that plan. Just as a matter of information, the Acton Maynard portion is just under 3.5 miles, and the bid on that, the contract on that, is for a little less than $1 million for the design.
Thank you, Don. Over here.
Yes, Ann Kirchman, 143 West Acton Road. I drive Track Road to Crow Island on a regular basis. On your map up there, you said there's a 10-foot exclusion from the final easement. There will be traffic on this road of cars, vehicles going to Crow Island on a regular basis. How is that compatible with a bike trail and baby buggies going on asphalt or trail? I'm just wondering, when you say there's some unanswered questions, will it be funded knowing that there are actually going to be vehicle traffic coming and going from Crow Island? I just wonder how this is going to, we have to put a barrier between the cars and the people? It's an unanswered question. I'm just bringing it up.
Thank you. Is there any answer to that, Don?
Well, that's a question for the engineers when they're designing it, how to solve that, because we have a non-exclusive easement because the Albrights wanted to maintain access to Crow Island, which certainly makes an awful lot of sense. Now, maybe the design puts the trail off of the road, or maybe the designers come up with some way of separating the trail traffic from the vehicle traffic, or maybe they paint a white line that says this is cars on this side and this is bicycles and people on the other side. That's why we need to have the design work done to see what the options are.
Is there any other debate on this article? One more. Yes, sir.
Dick Perkins, Red Acre Road. And I think that we need to remember that, number one, it isn't $230,000 that we're responsible for, and there's no other purpose for that, so you can't put it back in your pocket. It's federal funds, part of the highway funds. It comes to us because of alternative transportation. So and we're only being asked to pay $46,000. We already spent money to purchase the right-of-way, so the town meeting did say we're interested in doing this. And now, as Don said, this is the last money we ever have to spend in order to complete this project. The part that hasn't been mentioned so far tonight is that Hudson through Marlborough is already completed and being utilized by lots of people, and it's absolutely beautiful. And the design is good, it's solid, it'll last for a long, long time, and it would be really great to be able to ride your bike all the way from Marlborough to the Acton train station. You know, I think a lot of people that live in the section of Stowe nearby might well think I can be a commuter to Boston and yet just ride my bike to the station. Just one more reason for doing it. The main reason, however, still is that it's such a beautiful section of the river, and to have it be fully accessible to all sorts of folks is really a worthwhile project for the town. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Perkins. We have one more speaker.
Linda Sellier, 14 Arbor Glen Drive. I understand from things I have read, mostly in the Stowe Independent, that this rail trail, if it does become a reality, will not be connected between the Stowe-Sudbury line and Hudson, that all options have been exhausted for that completion. Is that correct?
We have not found a route through there. The old railroad line goes through the Honeypot Hill orchards, and they use it as part of their regular operations in there, running hay rides and such on it, plus using it for their own vehicles. They are really not supportive of the use of it for the general public as a rail trail at this point.
And so what would be the approximate distance or gap that would exist between the Sudbury-Stowe line and the Hudson-Marlborough Trail?
Well, what we're talking about, the trail would end in Stowe at Sudbury Road, right by the bridge over the Assabet on Sudbury Road. And there's another mile and a half, 2 miles, I think it is, to Hudson. There's another couple of, three other parcels that would be needed in order, beyond Honeypot, to connect into the Hudson portion.
So those who would travel this proposed rail trail then would be on public thoroughfares between those 2 points?
That's correct, as though there would be an alternate at some time, because there's the Mass Central line that used to cross over Route 62, and it goes, see, how can I best describe it? Essentially, it goes south of the wildlife refuge, and if that ever gets built, then there's a possibility of connecting up through the wildlife refuge, but that would not be open after sunset each night, just because those are the rules for the Assabet River Wildlife Refuge.
Thank you. Over here.
Alison Campbell, 10 Wildwood Road. In answer to the previous person, this would connect you with the bike trails that are in the Assabet Wildlife Preserve, the Pilot Road and the old White Pond Road, which is an old Stowe road that was taken over by the Army in the 40s and is still paved, but as it was in 1940, I guess, when they took it over. So you don't just have this trail down to White Pond Road Bridge. You can then turn up the White Pond Road and go through Wildlife Reserve and then on to Patrol Road through. And there's about an 8-mile loop there. So this is not a 1-mile walk. It's about an 8-mile loop.
Thank you. Mr. Byron.
William Byron, again. I agree with, Mr. Moderator, I agree with one of the speakers on the other side of the room that it's all our money. However, he's paying that money to the federal and state government, and they are allocating it as they see fit. And so all the surrounding towns are sucking up that money. So why shouldn't we get some of it back for our own use? The other thing is, if we don't do anything with this portion, we might as well see if the fellow will give us our money back, because it's no good the way it is, and we've paid this money for this easement already. And as far as the traffic situation, that's true. That's going to be somewhat of a problem. However, I think if practicality ruled, which seldom does lately, that the Crow Island people would be wise enough to have at least one-way traffic on that road, so that you would always go in to the Crow Island on one end and come out on the other, no matter how inconvenient it might be.
Thank you. Over here?
Yes, Mike Duclos. I'd just like to comment on two aspects of the utility of this portion of the trail. The first is the aesthetics. It is right next to the river and the wildlife refuge, well away from cars. It's a beautiful linear park. And the second is, if you try to get from Sudbury Road Bridge to Maynard with a bicycle, you're faced with the unpleasant prospect of going either down Route 62 and 117 or going down Hudson Road, neither of which is particularly conducive to cycling or walking. So I'd suggest that we have here a very high leverage proposition to gain value for the town by proceeding with this. Thank you.
Thank you. Any more debate? Seeing no more debate, we'll go to a vote. Just to be clear, the motion that you're voting on is different in two ways from the article in the warrant. First, it's $46,000, not $45,000, and it also adds a condition that the Board of Selectmen can add additional conditions on the requirements for this design. That said, all in favor of the motion? All opposed? That is nearly unanimous. I see 2 votes against. Thank you. So I'll call that unanimous. And we are ready for Article 4.
Mr. Moderator, I move to accept the provisions of Section 33B of Chapter 138 of the Massachusetts General Law printed below to allow the Board of Selectmen, the licensing authority, to expand the hours when restaurant liquor license holders may sell alcoholic beverages. Mass General Law, Chapter 138, Section 33B. The local licensing authority of any city or town which accepts this section may authorize licensees under Section 12 to sell alcoholic beverages between the hours of 10 a.m. and 12 noon on Sundays, the last Monday in May, and on Christmas Day, or on the day following when said day occurs on Sunday.
We have a motion and second. Mr. Sarno, does the Finance Committee have a report?
They do. Mr. Moderator, the Finance Committee recommends approval of this article. It is important to note that this article by itself does not authorize the use of alcohol during expanded hours. It just gives our local licensing authority, the Selectmen, the authority to do so. Thank you.
Is there any debate on this article? Any comments or questions? Seeing none, this motion requires a majority vote. All in favor? All opposed? I see 2 opposed, 3 opposed. I'll call it clearly in excess of 2/3, this requiring a majority vote. And I believe that is the last item of business. I'd like to take a moment and thank the folks that helped make this town meeting work very well. I guess I should start with Gary Horowitz, who I think volunteered to help me with something that was quite a bit bigger than expected. Thank you. And Liz Painter, who volunteered to help with any overflow. Thank you all for coming. Our next town meeting, I believe, should be in May. I ask that you clean up any trash that you might have, return any feedback forms, return any town meeting handbooks you might not have, and thanks to the town officials and all the volunteers and helpers, and especially, I should say, Linda Stokes from Stowe TV, whose name I couldn't remember earlier. I'm sorry. Yes, Miss. Do we have a motion? I'm sorry. Oh, and return your cards. Thank you. We have a motion to adjourn and second. I'll take that as a motion to dissolve the town meeting. All in favor? Any opposed? I declare the meeting closed. Thank you.